Okay, so today I'm joined by Shagufta Iqbal, who is a poet I massively, massively admire, who is the author of Jam is for Girls, Girls Get Jam, amongst many other things, writer, facilitator, general badass, won many, many awards. Shagufta, do you want to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you.
Hello, hi. Yes, I'm a poet, writer, dabbler, really. I dabble in lots of different things, bit of filmmaking, a bit of installation art is what I'm getting into at the moment, and novel writing. So that's my new kind of areas of interest. But I'm really into eco poetry as well. So that's kind of my main area of interest, especially as a woman of color. I think it's important for us to be part of that larger conversation about what's happening in the world. And as we speak, COP26 is getting ready and underway. So I think it's kind of pivotal to bring that conversation into these spaces.
Yes,
That's a really
definitely so
long-winded way of
relevant.
saying who I am and what I do.
But that's just a tiny snippet of what you've done. I mean, you've done so much, and I love your book, Jam is for Girls, Girls Get Jam, and I'm often sort of dipping in and out of it for little nuggets of wisdom. And I keep changing which my favorite poem is. Like I was just reading Medusa's Rage, and I thought, oh, that's amazing! Such a badass poem. I loved it. Do you have a favorite one, actually?
You know what? I'm the same. There's poems that I'm really into, and I'm like, especially if I've written something new, because the feeling is very new and it's like finally articulating something that's been simmering away. But sometimes I also fall out of love with poems. So I look back at Jam is for Girls, I'm like, I should have put that in there. Oh, I should have edited that. Oh, I should have changed that. So yeah, it changes all the time, the relationship with the poems. But yeah, Medusa's Rage was fun to write because I wrote it from a really angry place. It was like very, and then I think recently in what happened with the women, so particularly in the last few months with what's been happening in the media and the news with Sarah Everard and also Sabina Nessa, and the vigils that have been held, I kind of feel like that poem is important again because it's so difficult as women for us to go into public spaces and not feel that fear because it's real. And it's a poem that I kind of feel it really captures that anger, especially when I was younger and I was wanting to go out and run, for example. And, you know, as the hours are getting darker now, you don't want to go out at particular times. So it really restricts your movement, your freedom to space.
Yeah.
So yeah. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your experience with poetry and how did you fall into poetry? How did that start for you?
I think I've always loved reading stories, and so I'd read something that really inspired me, and then, as when I was younger, I tried to write in that voice. So I write in the voice of Jane Austen, especially when I was like a teenager. My love poems are all in like the voice of Jane Austen or whoever I was reading at the time, Wuthering Heights. And then as I got older, I started to go to poetry slams, which was really new when I was kind of at that stage of writing. And it was fascinating to hear people just kind of really bring their own voice and their own person to their work. And I think with spoken word, it's so immediate, it's so visceral, so real. It was really powerful. The only thing was that was kind of like the early 2000s that I was doing that in. And so it was very male dominated. And a lot of the poetry scene was kind of verging on stand-up comedy. So the poems that did really well were like the comedy poems, kind of really funny ones. And my stuff was a bit more political. So it never kind of found a space in those venues. And then I think much later on, I started to go to events outside of, it was Bristol at the time, but I went to like places in London and I started going to Birmingham, and they were doing some really interesting stuff that kind of fitted more with the themes that I was talking about in my work. And I just felt really inspired, and that's how it just continued on. And I kind of fell into it, and I did study it. So I went to university and looked at I did a creative writing degree, and a women's studies master's. And so it's just been my interest. And I just think I think I was always interested in academia. I was always interested in politics and what was happening, but I felt like the academic world is so ivory towers, it's so
Yes.
disengaging, that you can spend years and years and years researching something, finding amazing theses and theories and arguments, and then you put them in a piece of paper, a document who no one's going to read, no one's going to engage with. And I just feel like poetry is something that really engages with people want to hear what you have to say because you're trying, and I think poetry does this, to speak to people and not be
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm so clever.
I guess it's about speaking
Yes.
their language and reaching into their hearts and talking to them. They say that if you really want to reach someone's heart and their, you have to speak their language. If you want to reach their mind, maybe you will throw in like 100 million facts and put a thesis paper down. It's not the same thing. And that's what I love about spoken word poetry. It has such a deep impact and it really evokes a lot of emotions, especially the kind of poetry that you write and the themes that you touch on. Like I watched your TED Talks. I've watched the Borders poetry, the documentary, sorry, and I just thought, wow, this is just really, really powerful. Like the messages that are coming out, and I know that you mentioned male-dominated and comedy type of spoken word poetry, but you've set up YoniVerse. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what is YoniVerse for those that are listening that don't know?
So YoniVerse is it was a project I set up. Oh gosh, so I think for a long time, like I said, I was kind of going into these spaces and I was the only one who was speaking about certain topics, certain issues. And then I started getting booked as like the young Muslim woman who's writing and doing spoken word about certain themes. And I got very comfortable being that person who was booked for those things, especially in the Southwest and certain regions. And then I remember coming across another Southwest-based artist who was South Asian, talking about some similar themes. And I was like, who is this person taking over my territory?
Please say Afshan. Please say
Oh,
Afshan.
Afshan's up north, so it's Amani at the
Ah,
time. So
oh
Amani was based in
yes,
Southwest. Yes, so
yeah.
she was from the States and she was studying at Exeter. And so Amani's name started popping up. And I thought, do you know what I'm not going to do? I am not going to be one of those people who is like, I am the only voice of blah, 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 blah.
Yes.
And I thought I spent so much time being lonely and isolated in some of the things that I've been doing. Let me reach out to Amani. So I sent Amani a message. I can't remember if it was on Facebook or what it was. And I said, do you want to meet up for a coffee? And she was like, yes, great. And then we met up just randomly and had like the best like couple of hours of just chatting about poetry and what it means to be a woman in the Southwest and a woman of color in poetry. And we were just like, I'm sure there's more of us. I'm sure there's more of us. And like, what if we could find each other and support each other and stop ourselves from working in this isolation and this loneliness? And then we just started kind of finding other poets. And I think we found Sharifa because I think Sharifa's got a really big profile. And then we met Shruti because I think Shruti was being published by Burning Eye Books at the time or was recommended to us. And then Shruti introduced us to Afshan, who's amazing, incredible. And we also had Sophia Tarker as well, who was
Yes.
incredible. He's an incredible poet and has a mixed ancestry with Indian ancestry as well. And we thought that's a really important
Yeah.
conversation to be having, especially as South Asians. What is a South Asian? Is it just like everyone talks about this North Indian kind of idea of what South Asianness is, or is it beyond that? And I think Afshan was really good at making us look at examining beyond just a Punjabi identity of South Asians and looking at Gujarati and looking at, I think Anjali also was somebody who's one of our poets and she was also from the Gujarati background. And it's really lovely to have those conversations about tackling this idea of what is diaspora, what is South Asian, and we realized that we wanted to have voices that were Nepalese and Bengali and Sri Lankan, because that is the whole of who we are as South Asians. And so we just created the YoniVerse. So the first night we had, there was a storm. I'm trying to remember, it's called The Beast from the East came. And we were
I
like,
heard
oh,
of that.
yes, we were like, we booked this night. It was going to be amazing. We had an amazing headliner. Our headliner couldn't make it. The Beast from the East. And we were just like, nobody's going to come. We're like, it's fine. It's okay. We've got each other. We're just going to perform to each other. We'll have fun. We'll eat samosas. We'll have a good time just between ourselves. And it got sold out. And there was a queue of people wanting to come and people messaging and saying, are there any more tickets left? And we thought, oh my God, like people want to hear us. People want to see what this is about. And I think there was just a kind of real hunger for it. And I think we just kind of happened to be at the right place at the right time, and had a couple of events, the Golden Tongue events, which was mostly at the Rich Mix. We moved around a fair bit in East London, and it was fun and it was great, and there was a real kind of energy, and then we all kind of got to a position where we started writing our own plays, our own poetry pamphlets, and doing our own tours. And so it was very difficult to then hold a space, because what we were really keen on doing was having an open mic space. So we'd have one or two headliners, but really open it out to our audience, particularly South Asian women, because we wanted to hear their voices. We didn't feel they were being represented enough in the poetry scene. And then it got to a point where we just had to put YoniVerse on hiatus because we were so busy in our own projects. And then obviously lockdown hit, events have been kind of, you know, non-existent,
pause,
really.
yeah.
Yes.
But you definitely tapped into something deep there, because it just shows that there are amazingly talented people out there trying to do their own thing and trying to reach out, and they're dying to connect with people, and we need representation. You're absolutely right about that. Hence why tickets sold out, queues outside the venue. And I think it's just such an amazing thing that you've set up this space, a safe space where people can get together, like-minded poets can get together and sort of cheer each other on and share their experiences of poetry and learn from one another as well, and be represented. Yeah. I think to have that
so.
voice.
Yeah, because I think we found that there were a lot of South Asian male poets who we felt were being given a platform in particular spaces, where they were religious spaces or charity events, but women weren't being invited into those spaces, and we thought, oh, there's nothing for us. We really are kind of like that stereotype of South Asian women, quiet in the classroom, that kind of, you know. We thought, no, we're going to do something about it. I don't know if you ever had a chance to come to one of the YoniVerse events.
No, I didn't. But I will. I definitely will keep an eye out for it, because I would love to come to one of the events whenever they are next on. So I will keep an eye out for that.
Whenever, yes. So at the moment, we've kind of gone back to the drawing board in terms of what we can offer audiences and what we can give of ourselves. So I think it's quite a tough balance. So, but I know there's a couple of other events that are similar that are happening outside of YoniVerse now.
The Henna Party, yeah.
And there's a couple of others, yeah. So I'm just like, there's another called Empowered Slough, which is really good, which is with Banana Sharma. She runs that one.
Oh, I know Banana Sharma. Okay, Empowered Slough. I will get that night down. So that will be one of my spoken word nights. I actually went to a few recently. So I've only started going to poetry events since the lockdown. So I got into poetry around the lockdown. So my story is quite unique, but I've only been to like 3 poetry nights. So I will look out for Empowered Slough. Nice. And it's just such an amazing buzz when you're on that stage and you're performing, and you just feel free. When you write for the page, it's very different to when you're actually performing spoken word. But yeah, actually, while we are on that, do you have any tips with people who want to get into spoken word poetry, or tips for how they should choose a poem to perform? Do you have any tips for poets?
Yeah, that's spoken word poetry. So my tip would be to go to lots of events, actually, and instead of signing up at the door straight away and being, I want to perform, listen. I think sometimes we're so ready to just put everything out in there. I think one of the first few poetry events I went to, I just went and listened, and I think I learned a lot from being in that space and seeing how other people were performing, what they were performing, how they were speaking to others, and then go back to your own work. Be very clear about what your voice is and who you are and what story you want to tell, because I think it's very easy to just say, oh, everybody else right now is talking about whatever it is, and then I'm going to talk about that too. No, talk about something that's true to you, that's your experience, because I think the spoken word poetry authenticity is so important, because I think you're speaking your truth, and you can tell immediately who's speaking from a place of, this is real to me, this is what, you know, I'm trying to kind of live through. So I think that's kind of my advice. Go to poetry events, go and see what people are doing, and then brave the mic. Just go and do it. Yes. And I think you'll find that different poems work in different spaces.
Yes, definitely. And I think that's excellent advice. Go to lots of poetry nights and listen, and choose something that's true, that represents the authenticity of your own experiences and your own voice. That's actually some similar advice that I received recently, and it worked so well. And I'm really, really glad that I chose something that was, I performed something called A Tale of Two Tongues, which is about me speaking different languages. Like, I don't know about yourself, but I couldn't speak anything except for Punjabi till I was 5 years old. And then I started learning English when I went to school and nursery, and it was a bit of a shock. But it was my truth and it was my experiences, and now I speak lots of different languages. But yeah, you can see the authenticity, you can see where something, it comes from the heart, where it's actually someone's real story. And I think those are the poems that I connect with the most as well, where there's that truth behind it. Yeah. And the ones that are political, but somebody's truth, where someone's
Yeah.
speaking from the heart.
Yeah.
Something I tend to like painful poems because that's the kind of poem I like. Either
You're such a
healing,
poet.
yeah, give me the pain, give me the pain.
Dark and depressing. Yes, that's all me. I
Yeah.
love it.
I like the healing, although A Tale of Two Tongues for me, it was quite a happy poem. But yeah, you've got your love poetry as well. But I think something about it is like very guttural, very speaks to my soul, because I think it takes someone who's been through similar experiences to be able to understand. So when people come on stage and talk about something heavy like divorce or taboo topics, or I don't know, there's other types of or abuse or anything, I can relate to a lot of the things that they're saying, or relationships that have gone wrong. And I want to listen to that. And I'm happy to listen to that, as well as the funny poems as well. But I don't know. And he was talking about divorce. That is our topic for this podcast. So destigmatizing the conversation of divorce. So there's a lot to say about this. So I'm going to pass the ball in your court and say, what's been your experience of divorce? Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so I guess in the South Asian community, we also have kind of a good sense of what divorce is and how it shouldn't be. I got married when I feel like I was quite young, but in the South Asian community, people are like, "Oh, you're very old." I was like 27, but like you're still not married. So I think maybe I kind of felt like I was doing something that I should have done a long time ago, but actually my maturity levels weren't great at 27, I think. And about 5 years ago I got divorced, and I have two children, so it's an experience that I've obviously been through, and I've seen people struggle through marriage and relationships as well, and just the stigma around it, especially if you're in small communities, small South Asian communities, what it means to be a divorced woman. And I think at the time, there weren't many people I knew who were getting divorced. And when they did get divorced, I just wouldn't see them again. It was almost just kind of like they dropped off the face of the earth.
Yeah,
And
they disappeared.
Disappeared. I wouldn't see them at, and I'm talking about women. I wouldn't see them at weddings. I wouldn't see them at Eid parties. They just kind of kept away from community. And I noticed that there's a trend where I'm not saying divorce is great, because it's not, because it's a horrible, heart-wrenching experience, but more people are beginning to get divorced, and I don't think there's as much of a stigma around it as there was previously. So yeah, that's been my personal experience. It's been interesting to see how the world is responding to and dealing with relationships ultimately in a capitalist world, because I think that's also something we need to look at, because we live in nuclear families. Our structures are very different from how they used to be. If you think about my grandparents, who lived in extended families, who had maybe support or interfering or people stirring things up, but also offering kind of like how to keep things together. So
Unwanted wisdom.
Yes. A lot of that probably, but also maybe support. I remember seeing sort of older generations of aunts who were kind of had childcare, and they were, as couples, allowed to spend time together to build on their marriage and their relationship, because they had easy access to extended family who were living together. And so I think we look back on it and go, oh, that community was very stifling and suffocating, but there's always a benefit as well. So I think it's twofold. I think we live in very kind of nuclear households where as a husband and wife, there's a lot more on you. You are each other's best friends, and you share each other's hobbies, and you share parenting, and you both go to work, and you both run the house, and it's tiring and it's exhausting. How are you going to fulfill all those roles for each other? And yet we don't have enough, I feel like, support systems or systems in place to kind of really help people, especially in those early days, get through that phase in life.
I think you've touched on something really important about society changing over the years, through the generations, and the fact that we used to have, like, it takes a village to raise children. You said you've got two, like myself. In the past, we would have had a lot more support, and you would have had that time to reflect, connect as a couple, and you've got that sort of support system. And now we've gone from a very collective society to a very individualistic society, like with nuclear families, the 2.4 kids, and the roles have completely changed. And there's a lot more pressure, I would say, on women to earn a lot of money, have a career that's fulfilling and enriching, and have things to say, and have hobbies and look after the kids and try to live a life that's where you are a role model to your children, and trying to juggle. There's a lot
I've
to
seen,
juggle.
I mean, there is a lot, and there are some women who do it. I'm really like, wow, hats off to you. But I've never been one of those people who can, I mean, I've got to put my hands up and say, look, I can't do that. I can't go to work. And, you know, your work has to accommodate your family. So people are like, oh, be a school teacher because that will accommodate family. School teachers work incredible hours. It's
Yes,
not easy
it's not
at all.
easy.
But so you've got to have a career that kind of allows you time to pick up your children, drop off your children, and then you go to work, and then you come home, you cook, you clean, you look after your children.
Yes.
And it's just not going to work. It's just, you know, it has to be a partnership. It's got to be equal balance. Yes, you know, as the different sexes, you probably will have different interests, or you have different responsibilities, but you have to support each other. And if you're there saying that, I'm not doing that, it's
That
it's
makes
set
it
up to
really
fail.
difficult.
Yeah, because I'm a human at the end of the day, and I'm going to
Yeah.
be the first to put my hand up and say I need help with, because I'm still figuring things out. You know, you go from being in your parents' house to being into, you know, a house of your own. I think there are a lot of people who aren't equipped to deal with that reality of what it looks like to live on your own. I was fortunate enough to move out. I went to uni, and then I lived on my own for several years. So I got to a point where I was very independent. So losing that independence was really hard for me as well.
Talking about independence and identity, so moving from your parents' home, and then you've had a phase where you were very independent and you were looking after yourself and making all the decisions, and then going into an environment where you're in a family where, you know, you're settling, you're learning new things, and it's a completely different thing. How do you feel your identity changed through the process of divorce or marriage and then divorce? And
I think, you know, everything's a learning process. So when you get married, there are some things that you go, oh, this is unreasonable, and this is, I'm not putting up with this. But now I look back in hindsight, and I'm like, actually, I'm glad I went through that, because I learned something. And, you know, I might have seen something as being very unreasonable. For example, the South Asian setup where you live with your in-laws. And, you know, a lot of people kind of are very much against that. They're like, oh, you shouldn't live with your in-laws. And initially I was like, what is this? But I mean, I live with my mother-in-law, and I learned so much. I learned so much about my history. I learned so much about my language, my culture. And it was just, I felt like I really connected in so many ways. Obviously, it was not easy. It's not easy for either of the parties trying to live and learn to live together in this kind of multi-personality, kind of different power dynamics household. But there's always something that I think you need to kind of see the gratitude in. So I think everything you learn through, and I think the same with divorce. I feel like I learned a lot about my character, what I was willing to compromise on, what I'm willing to sacrifice for, what is important to me. And I think looking at what that can be is very difficult, because I think you're so used to seeing is that anybody who wants to get divorced, especially if a woman wants to get divorced, it comes from a place of selfishness. And I think when I was getting divorced, having seen some and growing up in quite negative marriages, and being impacted as a child by that, I realized that children are better off in single parent households
yes,
to happy parents who live in stable homes, rather than in a marriage that's not working and is just a really tense, horrible atmosphere. That was just something I kind of learned. And then, yeah, so I learned that about myself, I think.
I think I read something recently that really resonated with me, which was that in many South Asian families, people are praised for staying together for as long as possible. Like, you're running this marathon and you're dying, but you're running it together and you're going to get to the end. But actually, it's not about running that marathon together. It's about healthy relationships and modeling healthy behaviors for children, so that you can see that this is what, even if it's a short sprint, it's a healthy short sprint, and this is what positive behavior looks like. Because often people say, well, you know, they're still together, this must be a great thing, but actually it's very toxic, it's very unhealthy. And as you just said, it's better to have single parent households, so it doesn't impact negatively on your own mental health, your partner's mental health and also the children as well. So there's loads to be
Yes.
said about positive relationships and role modeling those positive behaviors. I mean, for me, I grew up not seeing many positive role models. I saw a lot of people who were together for a very long time.
Yes.
I didn't see I didn't see people who were very much in love with each other. Although my granddad and my grandma, totally arranged marriage from India, he absolutely worshipped the ground she walked on. They were so in love. But that was like a fluke. So, but
Well,
I
see,
think
I have seen there's a handful
yeah,
of those kind of
yeah.
relationships that I saw growing up. And what I saw in those relationships is that both sides were willing to and wanted to do for the other.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like necessarily that they were very successful in their careers or they had the best jobs or the most money, the best holidays. You know, you got this kind of horrible Instagram reality of what marriage and
Oh, yes.
relationships look like, and perfect family. That's not necessarily what they had. There was a lot of compromise, there was a lot of sacrificing, but it's the people who genuinely care for each other, and they do something from a place of care that you can see that. And that's the same thing I've been told about my grandparents. So they had an traditional arranged marriage in
Mhm.
Pakistan, but very much in love, and very much kind of, you wouldn't see them without each other. Like wherever they'd go together. You know, that's the kind of relationship they were. And I have one
Yeah.
or two uncles and aunts who have that kind of lovely relationship where there is a lot of mutual respect and care. I think that's the word, really, care.
Yeah.
Um, so I feel like when I was getting divorced, I was very, oh no, I'm going to be one of those people who's got divorced and blah blah blah, and it's because I'm like this and because I'm like that, and I failed and I've messed up, um, and låggarking. That was the other thing,
All
låggarks.
people
And
say.
I know, but actually, I think what really helped me through my divorce was my religion, and that's so going back to this idea of like culture, religion, and I think, even in English society, divorce isn't, it's kind of like, oh, you're a single parent mom. Look at the things that, even government, Boris Johnson's been saying about single parent moms, etc. Um, it's very negative. And then when I was looking at the history of Islam and the teachings of Islam, it's like, well, okay, God does not look favorably upon those who do divorce, and it's not seen as a good thing. And I understand that, because if you're just getting married and divorced, married and divorced, married and divorced, it's just you're ruining the sort of the sacredness of family. Because I think family is really important, because you're trying to build something stable for your children. And I really value family, whichever way it looks like. But then it also said that, let them go in kindness. If you've tried everything, you've tried this, you've tried this, you've tried this, you've tried this, and it's still not working, then let each other go in kindness. And I think when I read that sentence in the Quran about letting somebody go in kindness, I really felt empowered. I really felt like, yes, we've tried all the different tries, and Islam has been here for many, many years. I'm not the first person to get divorced. I won't be the last person to get divorced.
Yes.
But if I'm following the principles as much as I can, and it's saying to let somebody go in kindness rather than hold them with resentment and bitterness, that is the best thing to do. So I think that kind of really gave me a strength, in terms of being able to approach divorce.
That's so
Yeah.
empowering. It's actually quite funny because so I'm not Muslim, I'm Hindu Punjabi, and the word divorce, it exists in English. Talaq exists in Urdu, but
Yes.
the word divorce or talaq doesn't exist
Doesn't
in
exist.
Hindi.
Yes.
So it's very empowering that in your religious sacred text, in the Quran, it mentions let them go in kindness, and I think it's a very mature way of looking at things, rather than saying, yo, we're going to be together for 7 lifetimes. You're stuck with me. Yeah.
Or till death do us part.
Till death do us part. Yeah. It's
Yes.
like, no, no, no. I like the let them go in kindness. I like that's more mature, I think. Because
Yeah, I
like
mean,
7
but
lifetimes, really? Like one might
not
be
just the
enough.
one mistake 7 times. Well,
7 times.
I guess maybe you think about it more seriously before you get married, then, because it's 7 lifetimes. Maybe
Yeah.
there's a
But
benefit on that side.
often people don't have a choice, though, do they? I mean, they might be young, they might be naive, they haven't thought about it very carefully. And often people in media and in general culture, there's the whole build-up about how to get married. There's such a big focus on how to get married, how to cook, how to be the perfect daughter-in-law. But then there's not much information that I received. How to live in a healthy relationship, what that looks like, how to keep things sustainable, that conversation. It's like in Hindi films, like the falling in love part, and then the films just stop. There's no conversation
Yes.
about having kids and the parenting and the struggles. It's just all about the falling in love part. So I think
Yes.
there's lack of information there, but I think there's a lot that's changing. But you mentioned things like stigma and feeling like a failure. And I think for me, I don't see someone who's divorced as a failure, but I think that sometimes with politics, with government support, with how people react, they just assume that everybody is in a couple. And also with, you mentioned some people disappearing from social settings like weddings, and I wonder if that's because they don't want to have those conversations in the community, constantly be asked about, are you getting married now? Oh God, she's divorced, and look at her, and oh bichari, that conversation. Or whether they actively chose to stay away from the community because they didn't want that, or whether the community said, we don't want to deal with someone who is divorced. And I wonder which way around things go.
I think it's a bit of both. And I mean, I've been in social settings where I've literally had women who I've never met them in my lives, but they're the relative of the relative of the relative of somebody. It's always that auntie who just come up to my face and is just like, you're a horrendous person, you're this, and you know, it's very kind of, especially when you're young and you've got somebody older than you, you're already in a kind of very vulnerable place, and you've just gotten divorced, you're on your own. To kind of have to deal with that is really overwhelming. And I think a lot of people who find themselves, you know, having left a marriage, you're kind of building yourself back up again. And to go into those spaces, you've got to be prepared mentally and sort of just have the strength to be able to be in that situation and just go, you know what, I'm just going to ignore this, I'm just going to rise above this. Because you do get really, and I've been in those situations where I've had people, I've had friends as well who've been divorced and been in those situations where they've just been almost attacked by somebody, and but not even ostracized. So I think ostracized as a kind of like somebody's, but to be kind of verbally almost abused by somebody's coming up to you and saying these things,
who doesn't even know you,
who doesn't know you. It's really overwhelming. And so I don't blame people to wanting to step back from that, because, you know, if we go back to that verse that I was talking about in the Quran, it's about kindness. You know, if somebody's in that situation, let them build themselves back up again. Let them be strong enough to be able to raise their children. Hopefully both partners, exes, are able to be in a situation where they are mature enough to make sure that there is a suitable kind of childcare plan without kind of aggravating the situation even more, which sometimes I think our communities do. They kind of have absolutely no idea about any of that and the consequences of interfering. I think you just kind of have to sometimes safeguard yourself and say, I don't want to be in that space because I don't want to deal with that on top of everything else I'm dealing with.
I think talking about being in a safe space, and we've spoken about childhood, we've spoken a tiny little bit about abuse. There's two poems that I would like to read, and then it would be really amazing to kick off. And so I'm just going to start with mine because I don't think I can follow your lead. So I'm just going to start with mine. I'll do mine first. Okay, I've got two. So this one's called Dreams. Understanding your deepest regrets before your dreams, learning of your struggles before your accomplishments, watching you lying on the floor in a deep sleep. I learned that darkness precedes our dreams. So, I mean, this poem is deeply personal and it's true to me, and it is about abuse and things that I've seen. And then I have another one called Cycle. You create a cycle when you break a mother in front of her child. Then you wonder why they want to break others. So those are my two poems. And I think that those two poems right there are reasons why people should get divorced. Because when we talk about modeling positive behavior, and I think a lot of people stay in toxic environments and toxic relationships to keep the peace. But sometimes I think you just need to go your own way in kindness and take yourself in a situation where you can build yourself up and where you can be happy, where you can wake up content and happy. And I think you can't change history, but it does impact future generations and things that they've seen. So those are two poems that are close to my heart.
I mean, that's so powerful, that cycle that you talk about, you know, witnessing that kind of cruelty and then trying to kind of place yourself as a child somewhere amongst all of that. It reminds me immediately of a great poem by I can see her face, a Brahmi poet, Nafisa Hamid.
Okay.
So, and she's got an incredible poem, very similar to what you've just talked about, this cycle of violence
Ah,
as well, about a child witnessing this violence and the impact of that. And I think what you kind of captured so eloquently in those few lines really sums up this kind of power dynamic and the lasting impact of what we are creating in the environments in which we stay and live in.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
do you have a poem about divorce or something that you've written that you'd like to share? I'm really excited to hear.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I'm still
We're
sat here
still
taking in
thinking about
yours.
that.
Yeah, yeah. Because I think you've just done it so eloquently, just in a
Yeah,
few
I
lines.
sometimes I think the best poems are the shortest ones, and I think this one just came to me really quickly, and it was like it's only like 5 lines, but for me, it spoke a lot about a lot of my childhood, and a lot of things I probably talk about in therapy.
Yes, poetry is very good form of therapy.
Yes.
So I'm inspired by what you've done, and actually, I'd like to share a short poem as well. I've got a longer one, but I think this short one, yeah, you're right. It does. It says everything it needs to say sometimes. So let me just bring it up. It's called Little Man of the House, and I was commissioned to do it with Do the Green Thing, which is a project around eco poetry. And it was illustrated by an incredible illustrator, Sabah Khan, who's recently released her debut graphic novel. So I think everyone go and check out Sabah Khan. She's also very
Sabah
incredible.
Khan.
Yes. So it's called Little Man of the House. Little man of the house, I worry about you, even though I know there are many little mans of the house. Your father before you was, my brother is, and I'm sure my father was once too. I worry what love looks like to you. Quite possibly it is all hurt and partings and the graspings at strands of what once was. Little man of the house, does my love suffocate you? Your chores have doubled up. The hoover is your job, the recycling too. Little man of the house, I have started to sit you in gardens. We push our hands into the earth, sow seeds. We wait for sun and rain. We wait for tomorrow. We are relearning that love is a beautiful responsibility, and it is patience and all of our dreams in that small first sprouting, all green and fragile against the morning light. Little man of the house, what does love look like to you?
Oh, I love this. I
So
love this.
it's,
It's really beautiful.
yes, so I think especially when you are a parent and you're getting divorced, you really think about the impact of that on your children, and it's so it's so overwhelming because you think about the responsibility then that suddenly bestows your children, because you're not just okay, now I'm a single parent mum, because suddenly your children have to step up and they've got to fulfill certain roles that they wouldn't have to do if they had two parents kind of chipping in and doing everything. So yeah, I kind of felt like I really wanted to write that.
That was really beautiful. And I really liked how earthy it was and how you spoke about the garden, and it was really really nice talking about the roots. And then there's some things that are like everyday stuff, and it just made me think, what does modeling love look like, or what kind of roles, what does masculinity look like, what kind of chores do we take on, what behaviors are modeled? So if someone takes out the trash, or someone just does one thing, is that supposed to be love? Or what does love look like? It's
Yes.
like the things that we show them, what do they internalize? And then because they will then model the same behaviors really, or copy them, sorry.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. So I think that was just something, and I think that was also coming back to, and I keep coming back to this line of letting somebody go in kindness, but it was this idea that um, in Islam, if anything is taking you away from the path of Islam, then
Mm.
it's best for you to take yourself away from that situation. And they said that whether that's in Islam, you really, your parents, your ancestors, you have a real responsibility to them. But if they are taking you away from the path of Islam, you have a responsibility to then distance yourself, but still maintain a respect. And I thought about that because I felt like during the end of the marriage, during the end of anyone's marriage, I think you kind of stop recognizing yourself because you are really struggling with who am I, what am I doing? And I think when you are at that point of tension in your life, you act out in ways that are unbeknown to you, and you question, like looking back in hindsight, like, why was I doing that? Why was I doing that? And you could just see also I went for a massive fringe. It really was not my look. They always say a woman with a new haircut is a woman who's just left a marriage. But there were things that you were doing that's just out of character, and I felt like those things were taking me away from Islam. And I thought, if that's taking me away from me, like my path, my way of being, my kind of solace and my peace and tranquility, then it is detrimental to this life, but also the hereafter. And so I think all of those things really make you question that and give you kind of more resolve in terms of thinking about what you're doing. Because what I didn't want to do was do something just because I'm angry, or because I'm like, oh, this isn't working out, I'm done, and because I think we got a cancel society. We live in this culture where it's kind of like, oh, say bye to the man, just get rid of him. And I think, when you are in a relationship where you've got a family, you've really got to think about it.
You have to think a million times. You have to be so sure.
Yes, so sure. And you can't just go back and regret what you're doing. And I kind of really thought about, am I going to regret this? And I thought, no.
I think divorce is hard as it is for anyone in any context. But I just feel like when you add two other small beings in the mix, you're kind of like you've got more pressure, because you're not just thinking about what's best for you, you're also thinking about what's best for them. And sometimes people compromise. I've seen so many people compromise and stay in unhappy situations, and it's because I think that that's the right thing to do. And I think, honestly, I think that if you as an individual are happy, you're content, you're on the right path, whether that's religion or whatever it is, I think that that's the most important thing. Because ultimately, in my mind, families mature, they grow up, and eventually children do move on, but you have to live with you your whole life, and that's the person I feel you owe your biggest loyalties to. But as mums, we don't always do that. We put everybody else before us, and I think that can be so tricky. So it's not easy, not easy for all those people that have had to make those difficult choices. And I salute women who've had to take that difficult choice. I think that's amazing. In terms of like destigmatizing divorce, we've spoken about things that are stigmas. Like, what can people do, would you say? What would have helped you on your journey for people to have made it easier to destigmatize the idea of divorce?
So this is another funny one, because I think I was about 35 when I got divorced, and so I had friends who were getting married around about that age of 35. And I remember also thinking, I'm South Asian, I'm a Muslim woman, and I had people say to me as well, look, you've got two young children who's kind of want you. And that was a real reality. It was like, I'm 35, I'm going to be on my own probably for the rest of my life, and am I okay with that? And because it's something it's very real. And I've seen that happen to women in the older generation who maybe their husband has left them, and they've moved on and they've got married, but those women have been left behind, and then they spend their whole lives being mothers. Then their children go to university and get married, and they've been forgotten. And I just thought, oh, okay, so that is another thing that I've really got to think about. It means potentially I'm going to be on my own for from this day on forth. So there's a really big kind of like just so many things you have to weigh up. I think seeing people who've been divorced and seeing their positive story would have been really important. And I remember I've had one or two aunts who I didn't see, and I heard snippets of how they were living their lives, and I heard snippets of really negative things apparently of how they were living their lives, but then heard from like reliable sources that, this person just moved on. They're just, it's a normal kind of moving on. They're living in a different city. They're married again. They have a family. And I think being allowed to have access to that would have been so empowering, because you suddenly feel like it's not the end of the world.
Yes.
And it's possible to move on. I think that's really important. I think, unfortunately, because I didn't see enough of it around me, I was still, again, lucky to be able to turn to the sources of religion, I suppose. And, Khadija, while she was a widow, but she had children, when she met the Prophet, she already had children from her previous marriage. So I think for me that was kind of really inspiring in terms of these are people, these are like incredible women that we look up to, and they've been very fortunate and they've been allowed to move on with their lives. So, you know, maybe I might be lucky, maybe my children will find another stable family home with me in the future. But just seeing those moments and those kind of lives of people who've moved on and exist and are happy, I think is important. I remember I had a friend who got divorced, and she, you know, had a really difficult time. And when she got divorced, she was, you can literally see, you know, sometimes you could just see the weight off of somebody's shoulder just come off, and just, she was so happy, and you know, she was going around smiling, and she did have somebody say to her, like a family member, just say, just don't show everyone that you're too happy. Just, you know, because it's just not, you know, you've just gone through a divorce, so just kind of rein in the happiness. But I was like, you know what, just show the happiness, because
let it shine.
Yeah, let it shine.
And I think as
because
a side
it's
note,
important.
yeah, definitely. I think as a side note, for anyone who said to you that you're 35 and you're damaged goods, or you're never going to be married or happy again, can I just say, if that was me in front of you, I would have said, Shagufta, you're 35, you're at the peak of your career, you're hot stuff, you're completely going to be happy with a man, without a man, it doesn't matter. You are going to shine because you're happy. And I think not many people will say that kind of stuff. They will just sort of give you the doom and gloom side of things. Even if they see that you are happy, they will try to say rein it in a little bit, because it's not the done thing.
I think when you are in that space, I think you just think of yourself very negatively. So I think it's very difficult to see a kind of positive future. So I think and I obviously I was going through a lot of depression at the time as well, because it's a really it's just one of those horrible thing to have to go through, because there's also instability in terms of when you've got children. You can't just go, okay, I'm moving out, I'm going to go and find a place to rent elsewhere. You've suddenly got a family and you've got to make things work. And how are you going to move? Where are you going to go? So all of those other things, you know, divorce is just about, it's the logistics. And also you lose another family. So, you know, if you've got sister-in-laws or brother-in-laws or friends through the marriage that you get on well with, suddenly you lose some of those as well, because they feel like they're being forced to make a choice over whose side are they on. All of that kind of, it's more than just losing one person in your life. There's so much other instability that happens around that, and I think we don't talk about mental health enough within our communities.
I think you're absolutely right. There is a therapy network run by Dr. Tina, and she runs something called the Brown Therapist Network, where she brings people in together, where you can find someone from within the community, within the South Asian community context, who is probably going to be more relatable maybe for some people, because they can understand the context and the dynamics, and there's less explaining to do. So and I think some people want to speak to someone who looks like them, who is of a similar background. And I think that's something that is becoming more and more known about, spoken about: mental health, depression, stigma, destigmatizing a lot of topics. So I think there's a lot of information out there. And I think while places like social media can be very toxic and unrealistic, I found that recently it's also been a source of comfort, where I've connected with people who I wouldn't normally have known about. So it goes both ways, doesn't it?
Both ways, yeah.
And I think sometimes in reality, in your like day-to-day lives, you might not hear of the positive stories of divorce or people, but then sometimes people are out there and they're blogging about it on social media. I haven't come across a blog, but I think that's, in that sense, social media can be really, really transformative.
But yeah, it's a tough world to navigate, and I worry for young people who have to make sense of that world as well as this real world, and the kind of pressures of it. But I do have one more poem to share, which is about mental health. And it was a piece that I was commissioned to write with a project, a residency I did at a museum called the Glenside Hospital Museum, and they were one of the first kind of mental health institutions set up, about maybe 200 years ago, but sort of when parishes were given the responsibility of taking care of people with mental health issues, rather than people with mental health issues being criminalized. And I found that history really fascinating, that, you know, you suddenly approaching it in a holistic way in terms of well-being. And so this was a piece called Spectrum that I wrote. A is for Alif, for Allah, the start point, the hope point. B is for baby blues, days when I cannot leave my bed, catch my breath, see beyond the shadows of this room. C is for community, for sending a text, congregating on Zoom, getting out of the house. D is for deep dark. Sometimes there is a place I descend into, thick and lethargic. E is for edge, my mind teeters on ledges. F is for falling. G is for grasping at normalness, making a T, thermal heat pressed to chest. You are still alive. Dunk a biscuit into reality. You are still alive. Do yoga, they say, breathe. Color for mindfulness, they say, breathe. Turn the fear off, let it know that you need the air too. H is for heavy. H is for hellfire, it's for help, it's for holding on, it's for heartbeat. I is for is it over yet? J is for points of joy, the flutter of bird flight, the sway of tree, the light on water surfaces, waves at your feet, the wind in your hair, waiting for all the cliches to have meaning again. It will be a painful reunion, but you will relearn how to hold joy like an old friend. K is for kindness. Try to reserve a little for yourself. L is for lockdown. The days all bleeding into one, these four walls, loneliness and TV, longing and forgetting to eat. M is for marbles. There is one my daughter slipped into my coat pocket, a bubble full of breath. N is for namaz. A routine of cleansing and purifying, hoping and manifesting all the pain that's caught in your throat. Let it fall into your hands. O is for one morning at a time, one afternoon at a time, one night at a time, one dawn at a time, one small prayer at a time. P is for picking yourself back up again. Q is for quiet, for silence, for solitude, for everything to just stop. Just for a moment, so you can readjust, dust the sadness off. R is for the romantic in you. You are known for your melancholy, for your drama, but R is for also rewriting your own truth, to pull all the versions of yourself out, lay to rest the ones you no longer recognize, brush away the lies, the insecurities, the voices, and distill the truth of you. Be gentle with it, plant it, water it, let it see the light. S is for shifa, sabr, small baby steps. Nothing happens overnight. Just watch the motions of hope. See it in the world around you. T is for tasbih, 99 names. Ground yourself in Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Al-Latif, Al-Wadud, Al-Wali, Al-Nur. U is for unhappy. U is for you will never understand. The whole universe is weighing down on me. U is for unscramble, untangle. U is for unloved. V is for viewpoint, for stepping away from the thoughts in your head, for looking at the world without the heaviness, to see rain as just rain, a parking fine as simply a parking fine, heartbreak as just one experience of many that makes us human, and grief, the cruelest, as a reminder to appreciate life. These are the right now feelings in a whole lifetime of feelings. They're just one element in a spectrum. Know that joy and happiness and comfort and love also exist on this spectrum. You will feel these things again, one day at a time. W is for where do we begin to fix? X is for X-ray. Look into me. I feel so broken. Nothing feels right. Everything is falling apart. And Y is for yesterday. We cannot go back to yesterday. You are still here today, broken but here, healing and here, breathing and here, believing in a tomorrow. You will see it for sure. You have, after all, survived today. So let us see what tomorrow can bring. Let us keep moving forward. Z. Wouldn't it be great if everything was neat and tidy? The end packaged and handed to you, conveniently written down and planned in our diaries from A to Z like this poem. But we don't always know what will happen next. We know it's not going to be easy, but then what it will be, I guess, is a taking back, a rewriting, And who knows, it might even lead you to the end of this spectrum. I guess this is the bit you decide.
Thank you. Oh, Shagufta, I love that poem so much. I actually watched it a few times. It's on your website, along with the Borders documentary and the TED Talks that you did as well. There's 2 wonderful TED Talks that are on your website, and they're just amazing. So I'm going to plug in all your socials and everything in the description of this podcast and online. Do you have any projects that are coming up that you're really passionate about? You mentioned a few about climate change. Are there any things that we've got to look forward to? You mentioned writing poetry as well, and a novel, I think. So tell us a little bit about what you've got coming up.
So I've been writing a novel for ages. A lot of it happens when I'm in the shower. I'm like, oh, that'll be a good storyline, but I don't get it written down enough. I do need to do that. But the one that I'm really excited about is a project I'm working on called Sirens. And Sirens is a project with Cape Farewell, which is a sort of organization that looks at bringing art to science around climate change and climate injustice. And Sirens is an incredible project. I'm a part of it and involved in. I've written a few poems. I'm working with an incredible musician who plays the cello. We do lots of classical Indian music, and I just we have so much fun with that. So that's a project that I'm really, really keen on at the moment. And I've just recently started a new project with Haramasi based in Bristol. And I've got the ongoing project Kiota, which is again in Bristol, where we put some multidisciplinary artists together in a residency and then let them create something magical. And basically what we do through that is platform people of colour artists in the Southwest. YoniVerse is on hiatus. My YoniVerse ladies are mega stars. They're incredible. They're launching books and writing plays. But hopefully we will come back and do something at some stage in the future. But that's the kind of stuff that I'm up to at the moment.
There's so much there. There's just so many things. It's incredible. Will you be making more documentaries? Because I love Borders so much.
I think when the right poem kind of comes about, I feel like, yeah, do you know what, this one needs to be. And also I worked with an incredible filmmaker, so I think sometimes it's really hard to find the right filmmaker. Elizabeth was just kind of, I'd have it in my head and she knew exactly what I was thinking of. I was like, this is what we're going to do. And I was like, yes, you knew, you got into my head. So I think when she's free and got some time where I come across another filmmaker, it's something I'd like to follow up. Yes.
For those of you that don't know, the Borders documentary won lots of awards and is a film about virginity tests in the 1970s, isn't it? It's for South Asian women who were unfortunately subjugated to this horrific experiences when they came over. And I'm sure that many of our ancestors would have gone through this, but they wouldn't have spoken about it, at least not to me. I've not heard anything about it, but it's a shame.
I didn't hear anything about it until in my 20s. I was researching some post-colonial work and was just absolutely shocked that this was kind of forced upon, you know, this generation of women, and their kind of relationship then with authority and the world of medicine, which is a conversation we keep having in this day and age about how people feel about vaccination. But I understand where the mistrust sometimes comes from because of the way in which brown and black women's bodies have been treated by medicine. But this clearly was just a case of sort of racist policy that was inflicted on South Asian women who were migrating from South Asian countries in particular. So yeah, that's something that I just felt like it can't just be a poem. It's got to be more than a poem. It's got to be something that I want to communicate with audiences beyond just kind of going and up on a stage and performing it. It needs something that's kind of dedicated specifically for it. And Angela, thank you so much for having me on here. We've been planning this for so long and it's happened. Yay.
Well, thank you so much for being a guest on Poems from My Heart. It's been amazing having you. I will plug in all of your socials, and please do go check out Jam is for Girls, Girls Get Jam, and all of your amazing work. Thank you so much, Shagufta.
Thank you, Angela.
Hey, thanks for stopping by Poems from My Heart, a spoken word poetry podcast where I interview authors, activists, writers, poets, illustrators, and together we explore difficult topics through the form of art and poetry. We talk on body image, feminism, living within the South Asian diaspora, abuse, healing, love, weaving spoken word poetry in each episode to convey difficult messages through art.